One interesting baseball TV ratings interest in your club item came out today. Despite this brutal Cardinal first half, they ranked number 2 in MLB for average home attendance and lead the league in local television ratings. How about that freaking stat?
Well, I think for a couple of reasons. One, fans who come to the ballpark, they've never seen this before. If you have to go back, I know we're talking about are the Cardinals sellers or buyers. You have to go back to 95 when the Cardinals were actual sellers. Remember when they traded Todd Zeile to, I believe it was the Cubs? That was the last time we actually saw them sell. And I think people enjoy, people, they don't want to admit it, but people like watching a train wreck. I mean, you think about, we talk about in traffic, when you see what's the delay? Why is it such a long line? Because people get a kick out of, well, I don't want to say get a kick out of, but they have an insatiable desire to see misery, to see carnage. And, watching this team, you always think that and maybe they're going to turn it around because you look at the team and you look at some of the players and you say to yourself, how could they be this bad with these sort of players? And you keep thinking that at some point they're going to turn it around. And just when you think they are, they get hit in the head and they go back to where they originally started from, and that was at the bottom. So I think that people are intrigued by what we're seeing. And I think that's one of the reasons why they continue to come out hoping and thinking that this is going to turn around because they've never seen it before.
Well, will the shock value, though, eventually evolve into I just don't care anymore? I mean, if it's September and things are like that.
I think when you get to September and you have other things to do, whether it's the NFL or college football or high school sports, you may see things kind of dwindle a little bit with regard to interest because you have more options. Right now, this is the only game in town. I mean, you have soccer, but you have people go to that. But that's only 22,000. So, I mean, it's not like it's a big, surge with regard to watching Cardinal baseball, who does twice that many people on a good weekend. So you just don't have anything to compete against right now.
You know what's amazing, too, Mike, is since Bill DeWitt took over ownership, I think it was 95, there hasn't been one September where we did not care about Cardinal baseball. Because even in the years where they didn't contend, they had the McGuire thing going on. But I'm not saying they won every year, but there was always a reason to watch at the end. And now we could be having the first passionless September in the Bill DeWitt regime.
Yeah, I agree. There's always been a reason to tune in September. And I don't know what the reason will be this year unless they get hot. Or if they make a deal and, they bring in good players, maybe that'll create some interest. But, or maybe they get in the hunt and now all of a sudden they make it interesting. Maybe they jump a couple of teams in the standings and all of a sudden maybe they're competing for, they go into September, let's say 4 or 5 games out. We've seen them catch teams before. So maybe that would create an interest, but they have a whole lot of work to do before we get to September in order to have that sort of interest.
Yeah, you brought up an interesting point on Sports Plus on Sunday night. Coming out of the gates, they're not exactly playing the 27 Yankees. They're going to face some good teams, the Marlins, but it is a schedule conducive. So, even though John Mozeliak said he wants to make trades, if they come out smoking, I'm not so sure it is a fire sale at the deadline, right?
Well, I think you still need to make trades one way or the other because, as I mentioned, with the schedule is in their favor. They can beat Washington. If they, if you take away the blowout game in Miami, the Cardinals are in those other games. Then they go into Chicago, a very beatable team in Chicago who's trying to make some decisions on where they're going to head. And then they go to Arizona, a team that they haven't seen since the early portion of the season. Now, Arizona's been pretty good throughout the course of the year, but I think the question is going to be, does Arizona have enough pitching to hold up in order to win their division, let alone compete? So that's a team that you might be able to do business against. So all of a sudden, you're in a situation where you say, well, wait a minute. We're in a division where we can leapfrog this team and that team, and all of a sudden we're back in it. So, but then if you go south, you still have time to make a deal because all of this will happen before the deadline takes place. So do you try and pick up somebody before the deadline to see just how good you can be? Or do you just say, listen, let's make a deal now and move on with it? But if you do that, you're signaling a sign of surrender. And I don't know if Cardinal fans understand how that works.
Yeah.
We haven't seen that before. I mean, we saw with the Blues this year where they decided that they were going to build for next year, and fans still came out. I mean, they still had some good turnout because the team was still intact where they played hard and they gave you effort. They just didn't have enough talent. This situation is similar where they have some talent. I mean, I don't see Goldschmidt or Arenado going anywhere. They've got some other guys that you feel like you can build around. So if you start moving, essential parts, especially pitching, then that will signal that, we're building for next year, and then we'll see what kind of fan loyalty you have.
Yeah, but you're probably not concerned. The number one concern is to be a good team again in 2024. So if you lose some fans in September, you'll have to take your lumps, correct?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, that comes with the territory. But I think it also says a lot about what your offseason is going to look like. Because you can't fix your team at the trade deadline, solely for next year. You're going to have to still be proactive in the offseason. And let's face it, when you think about the offseason, when you're a hockey fan, July 1st, first day of free agency or the draft is what you circle on the calendar because that's when you think you can make your team whole. I think the same thing applies after the winter meetings where you want to build some momentum. Whether you sign someone or you make a trade, you want to go into January by saying, hey, look, we think we've improved ourselves. This will be a better year than we thought last year was going to be. So you have to find a way to build momentum, and you just can't do it at the trade deadline of this year.
Okay, if they're just average or even worse, below average up to the deadline, you would advocate if you can't sign the big three free agents. I know we've talked about this a lot, but I'm going to give you this specific scenario, and then you tell me if you'd make the move. You play 500 balls for the All-Star break. You're 12 out. You show no pulse. You would advocate the trading of all three if you can't sign them, right? Hicks, Montgomery, and Flaherty.
I'm signing Hicks. I'm going to try to hold on to Hicks because he's going to cost less. And at last check, we don't have a closer in the organization. Okay? And I think we've all noticed if you don't have a consistent closer, it's really hard to win baseball games at the major league level. So that's the one person I would circle to try and sign. Now, the question is, who are you going to have fill those two spots as far as your rotation is concerned?
But do you even care at that point? I'm sorry. My question is, do you even care at that point? You're trying to build for 2024. Okay.
Well, yeah, I care from this standpoint. I want to have people who can give me a professional effort. Okay? Now, they may take their lumps, but I need to make sure that these guys are actual professionals at how they approach the game. And also, it's important to see how your other players respond because if they think you quit, then they may quit. And if they quit, then now all of a sudden you have a character issue that you're going to have to address in the offseason. So I'm not just going to roll out some guys and just let them take a pounding every fifth day. I want to make sure these guys that I roll out there are legitimate competitors that can actually help my team in the future and not just be up in the out.
I know Graceffo has battled injuries and McGreevy hasn't been lights out all the time, but would it be a big problem for each of them to get 5 starts in September?
Well, that's a good question because neither one of them has shown that they're major league ready. So to run them out there in that situation, I'm not sure it helps anybody, especially them. So you may have to find some spare parts elsewhere in order to make sure you fill those spots. And maybe you can get a flyer on somebody. Maybe you make a deal for a guy that you feel like can be a legitimate candidate in your rotation next year. And a guy who's already under control or has a year or two left on his contract, much like what you saw with Jordan Montgomery. That deal's kind of worked out well for him. The Cardinals got, I think, as much mileage out of him as anybody in the rotation. And, it's going to pay off for him immensely in the offseason.
Mike Claiborne with us, Hollywood Casino Pressbox, all new 590 The Fan. Boy, I tell you what, though, I'm not sure which of the three is the most appealing. Probably Montgomery if his hamstring's okay. But I hear this Texas stuff with Jordan Hicks, and they do have some young, high draft pick starting pitchers in their organization. Al Leiter's kid is one of them. I see what you're saying, that there is no alternative with Hicks. But, boy, you could yield something in return for a closer throwing 104.
Well, yeah, you can. But, again, if you think you're going to compete next year, and I think that you mentioned that's what they're trying to do, that this is not a rebuild. If you don't have a closer, it doesn't make a difference. And again, you don't have a consistent closer. Now, I know somebody would say, what about Helsley? Well, Helsley has been average since the All-Star break of last year. The injuries have certainly slowed him down also. So I'm not sure if I can pin my hopes on that situation. And I'm of the belief, Frank, you need two closers these days. The way the bullpens are used, and you look at the teams that are really competing right now, and I'm going to bring up Philadelphia. Philadelphia got off to an awful start. That bullpen right now they have is dealing. The reason why the Baltimore Orioles are playing well is because their bullpen is shutting the door after the sixth inning. If you don't have a combination of people in your bullpen, because you're going to use them virtually every day, if you don't have them, you got no shot. The game has changed in that regard. This is not a one-closer league anymore. You better have some other guys who can back him up, because you're going to try and use him 3-4 days a week, minimum.
All right. I think a lot of sports teams in the area are wondering, can they capitalize on a potential Cardinal malaise like we had at the end with the Blues? And we're not saying it's going to happen for sure, but it's trending that way. And you brought up soccer. I got a thought for you on this. As much as I've really gotten into it, headed to the press conference today and really enjoy the heck out of it and just love Bradley Carnell, I was walking out of the station yesterday at 10:30 with this real sports-minded photographer named Eric Voss, and the game is going on as we speak, LAFC and City SC. And I said, "Aren't you listening?" He goes, "No." And he would never not be listening to a baseball game if it was going on, or a hockey game. Part of it is because we just haven't had soccer here in a long time. But the other thing is the Apple TV angle, where not that many people have Apple TV Plus. And I'm wondering, why the heck did they do it? But they did it because they got $2.5 billion from Apple, even though they lost a big chunk of their audience by not being more accessible to the casual fan. A reaction to all that, please.
Well, you know what? I think that's a trend for the future. And I think you have to take into account, Frank, they're not catering to you or me, okay? They're catering to a younger generation that's going to be more outgoing and has good disposable income, that's already in sync, and they're building their brand. And I mean, it's no different than when the NBA decided to go to cable after they left NBC, and everybody said, "Well, how could you go to cable? How could you go to Turner? How could you go to ESPN? This is the NBA. It's a Big Four sport." Well, it's worked out pretty well, and I think at some point it could work out for soccer. I think that because soccer is still a sport we're still trying to embrace, and I think we're trying to embrace the men more than the women, because the women don't lay out and don't take dives like we see, on the international front.
You know what? That's a great point. Women don't take dives and fake injuries, do they?
Not as much. Now, you may have a few, but it's not as embarrassing as it is on the men's side. And it is embarrassing. And it's so embarrassing that the NBA is now, I don't know if you saw when they implemented the rule, you want to start doing that more, then there's a penalty for it. And the National Hockey League has an embellishment rule as well. And, I think if soccer wants to have true credibility across the board, they've got to figure out a way to remedy that.
I tell Joe that every Monday, that when I go to these MLS games, it looks like the guy was shot by a Magnum 44, and then 10 seconds later, and 10 seconds later he's sprinting like a Tony Dorsett 40 speed.
And so my thing is, how do you expect me to take this serious? I mean, it might as well be WWE wrestling. I mean, we know that staged and embellished for the most part. Now, I'm sure there's some wrestling fans that would argue with me about that. But bottom line is, it's an act. We know it, but we accept it in wrestling. But when you see it in soccer, you're like, you got to be kidding me.
All right, another group that may be interested in getting into some of the St. Louis sports dollar is Mizzou football. And Mike, it's the recruiting is all of a sudden getting better and better. He's in the mid-20s right now in terms of national rankings, and he's still got the Wingo star out there as a possibility. So, Mike, here's my thought is they beat South Dakota, and then they beat Middle Tennessee. And if they can beat Kansas State at home third game and then come to St. Louis for that Memphis game, boy, you talk about, having a chance to really own the town for a while. If they're 4-0 leaving St. Louis, that would be huge.
It would be huge, but, you just mentioned 4 teams that, Kansas State had a pretty good run this year.
Yep.
But the other ones are like, why are you playing them? I mean, they don't bring any sizzle. And I'm going to go back to my theory on scheduling. I think if you're going to actually consider yourself legit and you want people to take you serious, you have to play a team in a comparable conference. You have to play a regional opponent. And you can have a blood donor on the schedule if you want to. But you can't load up with all of them and then still think somebody's going to take you serious when conference play rolls around. You got to do a better job at that. And the same thing applies to basketball. I know how many times have we seen teams load up on blood donors through Christmas, and then when league play rolls around, they stumble, and then all of a sudden they find themselves wondering what happened. Hey, in order to be better, you got to play better teams. I'm sorry. And I know some teams feel like this is a confidence builder, but how good of a confidence builder is it when you beat these teams and then when you actually play somebody who's legit and you get your doors blown off and you're wondering, well, what happened? Well, here's what happened. You're not playing anybody. You got to play team tough. So I'm not going to subscribe to that being a momentum builder because I just don't think it helps in the long run. The long run is being better in your conference, being nationally ranked, playing in a legitimate bowl game to enhance your recruiting to be better. And if you're better at that, you'll be able to draw more fans, which creates more revenue. And that way you can upgrade your facilities and be a legitimate competitor. I just don't. Yeah. I don't agree with that whole that soft schedule thing. And I know coaches will tell you, well, we got to start somewhere. Hey, when you've been running a program for 3 or 4 years, there's no excuse for that. Go out and play somebody.
Now, I agree with your scheduling philosophy about 90% of the time. One of the instances is Mizzou basketball last year, where they did the exact thing they had to do, lost 20 games the year before, a completely new team, a completely new coach, and they start out of the gates like 9-0 and they got some momentum. I think Dennis Gates can't do that anymore, but that was a great way to begin it.
You can do that twice. You can do that twice as a coach, when you first start and when the year you get fired. Other than that, I don't think it works. And you have to remember, last year Dennis Gates started from rock bottom. Not only did he not have enough good players, the portal was an impact. It had a significant impact not only in his program, but certainly college sports. So, yeah, he can get away with it last year. I would hope that he wouldn't go that route this year, although when it seems like you're overhauling your program on an annual basis, that might be a trend we see for a while.
Yeah. I actually talked to Coach Gates yesterday about a player he's looking at. And, Mike, the recruiting is so good. He didn't really want to, spike the ball in this, but there's a really fine player, not in the area, but in the country, who wanted to commit, but Mizzou could not. I mean, this is a guy Mizzou would have taken at a heartbeat a few years ago, but they have other guys in line. That gives you an idea of the state of the program, that they think they can really get some great players. And who wouldn't want to play for Dennis Gates? That conference, that style, that likable personality. I mean, he could own the region.
Well, and I think the same thing applies for Eli. He's a little bit ahead of Dennis Gates as far as his tenure at Missouri. But I think coaching today comes with personality. Coaching today comes with the ability to pivot and adjust to what you've been given or what you tried to recruit. And I know you mentioned Eli earlier in his recruiting, and I know he's recruiting a lot of offensive players and some players that, that have the pizzazz. I'm waiting to hear about what offensive linemen they're bringing in there. Because if you don't have them, you have no shot.
Yeah.
And if you don't think so, why do you think Alabama is always, having guys they're always successful in the college ranks. But how many times or how many years do you see an Alabama offensive lineman be taken in the first 10, 12 picks in the draft? and that's where you build your program. We saw it this year with LSU. Brian Kelly found some offensive linemen that were just sitting around, and all of a sudden he converted them into players that gave LSU an acceptable offense. So when I'm talking about that for a minute, that's how Missouri's going to get better. I don't care if they go get another steak and shake All-American that plays receiver or running back. If you don't have somebody blocking, if you don't have somebody who can really make your offense versatile, you have no chance. And I think in the situation with Dennis Gates, he has a situation where he has to find players that are versatile. Okay, I think the positioning numbers that we used to use, or one is a point guard, two is a shooter, I think that's almost out of the window. You better find guys who are versatile, and we saw it a lot last year. He didn't have a lot of size. They got out-rebounded most nights, but he found a way offensively to be good, and his best defense was making sure they had the ball in their hands.
Mike Claiborne with us, Hollywood Casino Pressbox, all new 590 The Fan. I was talking to an NIL guy yesterday with another school, and I asked him about a player that they've been pretty close on and that they've made a really generous offer to. And the response was, all quiet. We've made our best offer. He's going to have to come to us. We're just not going to chase him anymore. And it kind of reminds me of what I did with Monique, that I just kind of backed off, and then she came crawling back.
She just crawling. Okay.
Yeah, exactly.
Hey, let's clip that. I'll make sure it gets on Monique's phone. We'll just text it to her.
Well, that's the only way she could hear it, because she never listens. But it is a little bit like dating. You take your best shot, and then if that person doesn't respond right away, well, you know what? Let's go to the next pretty girl, and let's make sure the first pretty girl knows about that, and then see if she responds. Correct?
Well, it's what Dennis Gates is doing. What you just talked about with recruiting. Hey, listen, there's a whole lot of fish in the lake now. All right, and if this one doesn't want to take the bait, then you move on to the next one, because there's too many players out there, and we're talking about guys NIL that with regard to high school. We're talking about guys that are in the portal. We're talking about guys who just, or you're trying to keep in your own program. And so there's a lot of things out there. And the NIL, and I was talking to an agent yesterday about this, and he has developed an arm within his own company. And that's all they do, is they have people who represent athletes for NIL deals, along with representing athletes later in the same agency. And that's where it's headed. And, you're going to start to see a lot more agents who have a lot more ring experience than, your Uncle Bill, who was sitting at the kitchen table, who thinks he can do a deal because he had 2 years of junior college. There are guys that are going to be much sharper than this. They're going to have relationships with companies that want to get in and don't know how. And you're going to see this whole game change dramatically within the next 18 months.
All right. As we speak, Novak Djokovic just advanced to the finals. And, I know we don't want to be prisoner of the moment kind of people, but I got to tell you, he's the only player to have won all four majors 3 times. He may win the Grand Slam this year, the Australian 10, Roland Garros 3 times, Wimbledon 7, the Open 3 times. Mike, he's got to be the best player in the world.
Yeah, he is. He's not everybody's cup of tea. But I think when you look at what he's done against Nadal, Federer, he caught those guys, and he caught Federer at the end of his career. Nadal's had some injuries that slowed him down, but there hasn't been a consistent tennis player like Djokovic has been over the last 10 years because guys have had injuries and guys come and go, and guys get distracted. There's a lot of different reasons. But he's a guy that – and he plays against everybody. I mean, he took on the kid yesterday, the day before, who was long and just did a lot of things that can throw people off. He's a versatile player, and he can play it any way you want to play it. And I think that's what's made him such a dynamic player in his career.
Yeah, and I don't know if he has lost a step, and he's 36 years old. That's what's even more amazing.
Well, I think there's a couple of things that come with it. I think that obviously, the equipment, these rackets that guys use today make them Superman.
You think they're better than the T2000 that you and I used?
I don't think there's any question. See, our rackets, we were concerned not about their flexibility, but eventual termite infestation.
Exactly.
I mean, those rackets were not very good, and they didn't hold up well. And I think the training that these guys go through now is far superior than anything we've seen in the past. And I think that's what's made a lot of these players durable. But I think for him, the one thing that I'm impressed with, and you mentioned his age, Frank, most of these tennis players, they're done by the time they're 28, 29 years old. They've lost the fire because they've been doing it since they were 10 or 12 years old, and this is a sport that has an incredible burnout rate. Golf is another one. Hockey is another one. Baseball is there as well. Their burnout rate is getting higher because of the demand and the stress that parents and coaches put on kids who obviously want to do something else. So for Djokovic to stick around this long is a real tribute to him and his commitment.
Good year to be a Serbian with the Joker and Djokovic. I mean,
they're taking over the world, man.
Yeah, they really have.
Taking over the world.
All right, what do we have coming up on Claibs Online?
Well, we have a podcast with Nick Ragone that we dropped yesterday, talking not only about the PGA and LIV, but where do they go from here? Because after the Senate hearings this week, I don't see how they get this thing done before next year because there's just so many T's to be crossed and I's to be dotted. And we had a great discussion. I'm of the belief that there are more women players on the tour, better players on the tour than there are men. And the consistency that we see on the women's side, in the last 21 majors, there's only been one person that's won 2 of them. Everybody else, it's been a different person in the last 21 majors on the women's tour. And that just tells you how deep that field is. And, when you think about the PGA, LIV did a couple of things. LIV created more openings for the PGA for younger players to ascend. But I don't know if we've seen any of those people ascend to the point where they can be consistent. And the consistency on the PGA Tour just isn't there. And because I think we're going through that transition of finding out who is going to be the next great player. And I rolled this question out to him yesterday, and I'll roll it out to you. If Frank has qualified and he's found himself in the Masters or in one of the majors, and he's going to be in the last group going out, who is that person that you think you'd be playing with?
Scotty Scheffler?
No, it can be. I mean, if that's who you think. He ran out the name John Rahm, which I think he's one of the more dominant players.
Yeah.
I mean, because he's got power, he's got a little swagger about him, and he's been there before. But, I mean, normally it would have been Tiger, Phil, somebody you knew was going to be there on Sunday. The game now is spread out on the men's side where we're seeing guys showing up playing in the last group or the next to last group that most of us have never heard of with any consistency. So it's an interesting time in golf. So we have that going on. We have the Dr. Rick podcast that takes place. It's dropped here recently. Rammer and Joe Roderick will start up the daily cards today, talking about the Cardinal lineup, and that's something I think any baseball fan should definitely be tuning into because they break it down like nobody else. And, of course, we always have some other interesting things that come our way during the course of the week. We'll have lunch with Claibs and Joe on Monday. So there's enough going around, and we'll have some other things we're going to drop next week that I want to hold off on before I actually announce them. We'll know more about them today.
All right. I'll see you at the ballpark today. Thank you, sir.
All right, man. Have a great week. Take care.
Right. Mike Claiborne joining us, Hollywood Casino Pressbox. By the way, he's right about, you're not sure on the men's side, but I think we are to a point where we have a big 4. Would you Rahm,
yes,
Scheffler, McIlroy, and Brooks?
Oh, is McIlroy? You have McIlroy up there?
Yeah,
he just hasn't won in a while.
Yeah, he hasn't won the big one.
Yes, but he isn't.
Major. But he's always there. I think that would be my top
fair.
4. But Scheffler, like next week is going to be the British Open, and I'm not a gambling man, but why not go to, is it the Alton Bell? That's where you can bet right across the river?
Yes, right across the river.
And just say, okay, I'd like to bet this amount of money that Scotty Scheffler is going to finish in the top 10. I mean,
top 10, yes.
Let me give you some of his tournament finishes this year, okay? All right. Genesis Scottish Open, 5th. Travelers Championship, 4th. U.S. Open, 3rd. Memorial Tournament, 3rd. Charles Schwab, 3rd. PGA Championship, 2nd. Wow. AT&T Byron Nelson, 5th. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Wait. 7 top.
Wow.
5 finishes, and then we go 11th, 10th, first, fourth, 12th, first, 11th, 7th, 2nd, 9th, 3rd. I mean,
It's video game numbers.
Yeah.
That's insane.
we're talking about 130 golfers, and he's always in like the top 5 or top 10. He's
impressive.
He's the best.